The Lord is risen. This is Father Joe Cisetti. Thank you for joining me once again. I want you to imagine something. Imagine going into a huge, vast cafeteria. And then when you walk in, there's this big, long salad bar that goes on and on. After that, there is a baked potato bar. There is a made-to-order pasta bar. There is a long line of soups in their own bar. Then there is a long, long line of entrees. After that, you see a dessert bar. Then there is a specifically chocolate dessert bar. And then at the Refreshing Beverage Center, you can get a double orange mint mocha cappuccino latte. And then imagine someone going into that huge, vast cafeteria and never going past the salad bar. All right, so where is he going with all this? Well, that's all an image for me. That's an image of the world of prayer. We have a beautiful, rich, wonderful, tremendous tradition of prayer. Now, when people think of prayer, usually they think of saying prayers. And that's certainly part of the world of prayer. That's like the salad bar. But there is so much more there. Now, in the coming year with Dynamic Parish, our theme is really going to be about prayer. And so I'm doing a series of videos here just about prayer and how important that is in our lives. So first of all, what is prayer? Just want to concentrate basically on some definitions today. Well, it's going to be tied in with what we've talked about in an earlier video, our three central mysteries, okay? The Trinity, the Incarnation, and the Paschal Mystery. So the Trinity, God is love, that we call Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The Incarnation, God has become human in the person of Jesus. And then the Paschal Mystery, Jesus dies and rises to new life. And as we grow in prayer, we seek to deepen in our own lives that Paschal Mystery that comes about through the Incarnation. And prayer is really about entering in this communion with God, who is a communion of love, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, talking about prayer is a little bit like talking about swimming. You can sit down in a classroom and you can study aquadynamics, all right? And you know something? That might even be helpful, okay? But it's not the same thing as just jumping into the pool. Same thing with prayer. Just start doing it. Sister Wendy Beckett was this British nun. She had a number of shows on PBS about art. And she's done a lot for me just to help appreciate art better, but also just in terms of prayer. And she pointed out something that was interesting. She said, talking about prayer is something that can be dangerous. We can talk about it, we can think about it, we can write about it. It's just like anything, but just do it. So the most important thing is simply just to start doing it. Now, prayer is a mystery, okay? And it's something we can't look at in the same way as we do the physical sciences, but it's something we explore. We won't fully comprehend it, but we continue to explore it. And a great reference for this is Book 4 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Book 4 is devoted to prayer. And some of what I'm going to be sharing here really comes from that Book 4. So that would be, that's a wonderful resource there. Okay, one of the most classic definitions, St. John Damascene. So this might have been, in the 7th century, more or less, give or take a century perhaps. He said, prayer is the raising of the heart and mind to God. Raising the heart and mind to God, or requesting good things from God. Now, we certainly think about that second part first, perhaps requesting good things from God, but also raising the heart and mind to God. And what I love about that definition is it doesn't say who's doing the raising. Do we raise our hearts and minds to God, or does God raise our hearts and minds to Him? And I like to think the answer is yes. It can happen both ways. So, lifting the heart and mind to God is a wonderful expression of prayer. Right? The Catechism goes on to say prayer is an encounter of God's thirst with our thirst. God thirsts for us that we might thirst for Him. You know, St. Augustine had that saying, "Our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they rest in you." It's as if there's this little homing device that goes off that can only be satisfied by God. And some would say, you know, we can ignore it, we can fight it, we can run away from it, but we just can't quite get rid of it. It continues to be with us. From the cross, Jesus said, "I thirst." Obviously, He thirsted for some hydration, but you can also say that as thirsting for love, thirsting for our love. If you've ever been at a chapel of the Missionaries of Charity, Mother Teresa's order, every chapel has a crucifix, and then by the crucifix there are two words, and those two words are, "I thirst." And what the sisters see themselves doing in serving the poorest of the poor is seeking to allay that thirst of Christ in that disguise of the poorest of the poor. So they aren't simply social workers who don't date. They are missionaries of charity who seek to satisfy that thirst of Christ in others. And we have a thirst in our hearts as well. And so prayer is about encountering God's thirst, God's desire for us, and our desire for God. Okay? Prayer is an expression of a covenant, a lasting, binding relationship, not a contract. A contract is something that's very legal and specific and has provisions for its own dissolution. A covenant is something that is broader. It's based more on love than on legality. And it's something that, in one sense, really can be violated, but not necessarily be broken. And so there's something very important. It's very important just in our faith about covenant. In the Old Testament, you see a series of covenants that takes place. Jesus culminates, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant, what we celebrate in the Eucharist. Marriage is a covenant, so that's very significant just to the theology of marriage and even the spirituality of marriage. All right? And so covenant is something that's very important. It's an expression of this lasting relationship. And so too, prayer is about growing in this lasting relationship. Prayer is also a communion, a common union. Now, one of the giants, and I do mean giants, of the Catholic spiritual tradition is St. Teresa of Jesus, also known as St. Teresa of Avila. So not our St. Teresa, but St. Teresa of Jesus, a few centuries before in Spain. And she has two beautiful definitions. She said, prayer is a conversation among friends. That's simple. Prayer is a conversation among friends. And then the other line she has is even more beautiful. She says, prayer is spending time with the one who you know loves you. Prayer is spending time with the one who you know loves you. And that's the definition. Prayer is really grounding ourselves in God's love. Okay. Joseph Bernardine was the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago from 19 1882 to 1996. He wrote beautifully about his own experience of prayer and all, but he said prayer is hospitality of the heart. Okay? Prayer is hospitality of the heart. It's opening our hearts to God. St. Augustine has another beautiful definition. He says, prayer is an exercise in holy desire. He says, we all have our prayer. Okay? Whatever the deepest desire of your heart is, whatever is the deepest down in there, he said, your desire is your prayer. So prayer is an exercise in holy desire. And there's one beautiful definition, just found out about this recently. Pope Francis and his Wednesday audiences is starting a series on prayer. And he said, prayer is the breath of faith. Okay, the breath of faith. Prayer is the way that faith breathes. So it's important that remember we're dealing with a mystery, and there's a number of different definitions here, and there's more that can go on. But before we start to explore things, it's important to just have an idea of what we're talking about what prayer is. And very briefly, I want to talk about what prayer is not. Okay? Prayer is not a flight from reality. At least if it's done correctly, it's not a flight from reality. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's something that allows us, it's something that prompts us, something that might even push us to embrace reality more fully. And prayer is not just a matter of feelings. Prayer is not a matter of simply psychological activity. Now, obviously, there's a psychological dimension to the whole thing, but there's more to it than that. Okay? So our prayer is this wonderful gift, and in prayer, we grow in generosity. We grow in generosity of heart, at least hopefully we do. St. Francis de Sales has this beautiful expression. He said, prayer is raising, as John Damascene would say, our hearts and minds to God, is lifting up to God, and the sacraments are God's love descending down to us. So kind of like Jacob's ladder, going up, going down, he would say. Okay, so too, prayer, we rise up to God, or are raised up to God. A beautiful line in Psalm 143. Let my prayer rise before you like incense, the raising of my hands like an evening oblation. Let my prayer rise up before you like incense. And so these days particularly, it's important that we take some time to pray. And as we continue in this series, I'm going to talk more about just prayer, some aquadynamics, if you will, about things. But it's important that we do it, and I'm going to be explaining different ways of praying as well. What we want to do is kind of take a taste tour of that vast cafeteria that we call the world of prayer. And in the meantime, let us continue to pray for each other and to pray for our suffering world.